independent-elect. But of course, across the counties, we have already received names of governors-elect, senators-elect, members of parliament-elect, and MCAs. And celebrations have been sort of put on hold for a while as we wait for the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission Chairperson Wafula Chebukati to make that announcement, which is expected any time from now. Remember, 7 days according to the law, that is the time frame that is given to the electoral body to be able to do that. So Kenyans have been patient, and we know you have, at least we have, been waiting. And so far, so good, I would say.
Absolutely, Safin. Day 6 after the ballots, and IBC is cutting it really close. Constitutionally, they have until tomorrow to announce it. My name is Trevor Mbija. It's such an honor being here with you. The wall-to-wall coverage of Kenya's Choice continues this morning. We're keeping an eye on the IBC National Tallying Center at the Bomas of Kenya. Just a few moments ago, there's an announcement of about 11 constituencies. They're at the tail end of making the final announcements here. You can see there's activity still ongoing there. The confirmation of the Form 34As, that is the polling station numbers, and then Form 34Bs, which is the constituency tally, which will then generate Form 34C, which is the national tally, before for that certificate, which is 34D now. So right now, that is what's going on right now at the Bomas of Kenya. As soon as there's any activity there, you shall be the first to know. And all the declarations are coming through on their website. You know, they've received Form 34Bs, 286 of them out of the 291, meaning they just have about 5 more to go. But physically, I believe most of the returning officers are already there. With us in studio, Cynthia Mutere, politics and governance expert. Thank you so much for making time, Cynthia.
Thank you for having me.
Danvas Makori is here, NCIC Commissioner, very integral to this part. He's been there as an observer as well. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.
We're still waiting for Harun Dubi, advocate of the High Court. Danvas, I'll start with you. The assessment generally of what has been going on so far. You've been an observer in this. You're also a commissioner at NCIC. What have you seen so far, and what do you recommend going forward?
First of all, thanks for having me. It's quite an exciting day to be alive today in Kenya, I think, to begin with. I think overall, if you look at what has transpired, what IBC has done, we have to commend them. I mean, given the challenges they faced, it's not been an easy road for them. Personally, I was an observer in Nairobi, the whole Nairobi. I was also coordinating our efforts as a commission from Nairobi. And of course, an observer at the National Tallying Center in the Bombers. And I've seen firsthand and up close and behind the scenes what's been happening. And I think it's a good day to be a Kenyan. I mean, IBC has set a standard that I don't think we can go back as a country. Of course, you get an incident here and there. You always have that, especially in a young democracy like we've had, and given the culture that we have, Trevor. But overall speaking, looking at across the country, looking at Nairobi where I was, and at the National Tallying Center, where I've been every single day, right before the elections and even after, I think overall, it's been a commendable job for IBC. All
right. Cynthia, what are your thoughts on this?
I do want to concur with my colleague here to commend the IBC for the work that they're doing. It's been an audacious task, and of course 6 days after the event of actually balloting, now we're in this season where we have to wait. And so one of the things that the expectations of Kenyans is just how IBC is communicating to them to relieve their anxiety. We heard from His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga yesterday when he was saying that the people are anxious, but not anxious in fear, but anxious in anticipation because they've waited so long to hear the outcome of this election. And so there's been a lot of anxiety. But we've heard it from IBC that they have communicated to us the time frames that they have 7 days until they can announce. Of course, this is the second last day. Tomorrow is the deadline. And so just how they are communicating to the general public and just managing that anxiety and that anxiousness is something that we want to see more of, especially today. So the people would expect to hear something today. And if Chebukati can come out and say, okay, I'm going to do this tomorrow, then everybody would breathe a sigh of relief and get on with our lives and get on with what we're supposed to be doing. So.
Indeed, and everyone is just waiting to get on with our lives. And Danvas, if you look at the history of elections in this country and how the process has been conducted so far, what is it that you look at and you say, indeed, the country has borrowed lessons from where we're coming from in terms of elections?
First and foremost, just the transparency. I mean, you got to give it to IBC, the level of transparency. I mean, for example, 2017, we had a serious issue transmission. You know, there was the accusation, something happened between by the time the vote was counted at the polling station and by the time it got to Nairobi. And this time they said, well, especially the ruling of Supreme Court, and I think even before I go further, IBC has been very systematic in applying what has been ruled as law. If the court says we do this, they do that, because they've gone through the ring a couple of times, especially what happened in 2017. So they know for a fact people will challenge the results. So they abide by the court ruling. But I think for me, it's the transparency and them sticking to the law, because we have to be accountable with the rule of law. And especially if you look at where they come from, remember there's a ruling that came right a day before. Yeah. Just a day.
On the use of the manual.
Yeah, and they're like, okay, you know what, it's a court, and we just have to do by it, because if you don't do that, then you have problems. And so I give it first of all to them, because sometimes it's contradictory. One court says this, and then the next day one court says that, and they somehow, even for them, it's been a challenge. I had discussions with a number of them behind the scenes, and it's really been a challenge, even if you put yourself in their situation. When you have 500,000 people working for you, and then you have to transmit the information that the court has just said today, and you polling such tomorrow, I mean, it's really a challenge. But I think I commend them, first of all, by the rule of law, but also the transparency they have. I mean, they gave everybody 34 A's, like, you know what, do your own tally. And for key organizations like your media house and other media houses and us, we have the API, where we had direct access to the portal, and we can just get results much faster than the regular folk. And we've all done that, so I give them that. Thirdly, actually, is a response. Whenever there's a challenge, they've been very quick to respond to issues. If there are staff down the Bashira, they have issues, they are fired or they respond very quickly. There's no time gap whereby there's nobody knows what's going on. They have challenges and they were bold. We had issues, for example, in the issue of Kakamega and Mombasa in terms of the papers that came in, and they made a bold, quick decision in sort of keeping everybody in suspense. We knew there were challenges. So also commend them in quickly responding to issues. Other times, they'll wait for 1 or 2 days, and then there's speculation, and then there's back and forth. And fourthly, we're in unprecedented times as far as even elections concerned in Kenya, whereby if you've seen the flurry of activity in social media from the day of election till now, every side is saying this, every side there's rumors, and IBC will be very quickly to say, hey, if for example, if somebody says the IBC systems were hacked, the chairman comes and says, no, our systems are very secure. So that response to despair, rumors, misinformation, disinformation is very good, because if you don't do that, it becomes a wildfire which you can control, and then so I give him to that. Yeah.
Cynthia, still on the same question, I don't know if you look at how this whole process has been conducted, what is it that stands out for you in terms of where we've gotten it, or even just specifically where IEBC has gotten it this time around?
In the whole management, the administrative aspect, as some of the things that he's highlighted here. I think from past elections, like in the 2017 election, the servers was such a key thing that the servers haven't been open. We don't have access. But right now, what is different is that they've uploaded the Form 34A, which is right from the polling center. Now, these have been uploaded on the IBC portals, and anyone has access to them. So that is very different. So whereas one of the key things was that to have the process to be fair, free, credible, and that it would be verifiable. And so we're having all the returning officers coming in with these forms, and that we are able to verify the actual physical form with what has been uploaded. So that's something that's very different, and that's making the process very credible. Of course, there have been discrepancies that have come through, we have seen through media. I think it was actually a journalist that actually flagged some result that had come from Kiamba or Kiambu or something like that. I think there was a discrepancy of some 10,000 votes, and they were able to flag that, and they were able to respond to that. And so to be able to actually verify that is something that is really key, because that's a question that came out from that's why the last election was annulled, was because it could not be verified. There are so many discrepancies that had come out, and since they could not be verified, the election was nullified and we went into the rerun. And so that's something that we've seen is different. And that's credible for IEBC.
Yeah, but Makori, you see, in despite the fact that it is an open field where anybody can go and download those forms and tally for themselves, there's still a lot of propaganda that goes out there. Nobody seems to be agreeing on the numbers. Is there a way that this can be tightened going forward so that there's a much more straightforward way of dealing with this rather than an open, free-for-all sort of access?
Two things. First of all, I like the word you use is propaganda. Facts are facts, and if you are fact-based, or your propensity is to go to facts, it's pretty much clear. It will be very clear because the numbers are there, and if people understand the process of how it's uploaded and the verification at Bomas, then those propagandas will be dispelled. Because at first there's been people hacked into the system and uploaded fake or disingenuous Form 34As. Well, first of all, you really can't do that. If you understand the IBC system, it's practically impossible to do that. But let me tell you do that. The most important thing is what happens in Bomas, because the 34C is filled by actual 34As that are then collected by 34Bs. It is the actual one, they see the physical one. They verify the QR code uploaded by this one. So yes, the rumors are there, and it's propaganda. How are the qualities? If you go to other jurisdictions like the US, which I've been there for quite a minute, only the media houses have the API. Okay, so it's like the citizen here will have the API, and you're able to yourself actually not just do the tally, but also call the election, because there they do call election. I know you guys are not bold as yet.
You're not allowed legally to call it.
You can do the calling, but declaring is different. So there the difference is they call it, but the official, of course, declaration is still banned by the EMB in a specific state. You understand? So officially, and then they're given just like we do here. But I think for me, there is we pay a higher price. Human beings are like a pendulum swing, so we swing from one extreme to the other. And I feel your question is, has the IBC gone too far to give us, everybody, hey, do it for yourself? To an extent, maybe people can argue that. But I think for me, the day we live in, I think we have right for information. IBC is a public entity. It's constitutional right you have right to access for information, and they've given us information that is basic. And like my sister has said, the verification process is very, very important, because that is what is going to be challenged in court. For me, we've set a standard for Africa, to answer your question. I mean, everybody is actually amazed at the level of transparency. I mean, I've been an election observer in a couple of countries in Africa. I think we've gone a step further than most places I've seen during the election, whereby the actual 34A is loaded up and everybody can see for it. So it's not, usually if you go to other countries, you're given just the total. So if it's 34A, you're told a specific station has 200 for this one and for that. So you can't really verify, you're not really sure because you're being told by the EMB. Here, IBC is saying, okay, here's a form, you check it for yourself. So when you tell you something, it is. So, I mean, I wouldn't say they've gone too far. Given the history of our country, I think it's a good thing, because when it's announced, it will be as clear as it has been. And the few errors, the clerical, of course, you have 46,000 clerical offices or polling stations filling these things. You'll miss a digital here and there. Human is to error, and that is when there's this very specific verification. And to finish off, people forget that when the errors are done, for example, it is an error form, so it will be filled, so it's acknowledged. They can't change it. They'll say, you know what, there's an error here done. So I think to me that's what I look at, and it's a good thing. Yeah.
So do you think this is going to bridge the trust deficit going forward?
When we did the election roadmap to 2022, the number one issue why we have electoral violence is what? Trust. And we had a discussion, if you look at IBC, to answer your question, in January, the polling was about 36%, people trusting IBC.
Yeah.
2 months ago, it was 60%. Now, where have they reached? They have reached they're almost 70%. I think going forward, if it wasn't for propaganda of people bashing IBC and that, but I think Kenyans now understand. I commend the media houses for you trying to give view to and people can understand the process. So definitely it will breach the trust deficit, because that is exactly why people fight. It is lack of trust. And they've been very, very, very transparent. Yeah. And I can tell you, it is very hard for anybody to come and say, this election was stolen.
Yeah.
Because it has been so clear. And so
Despite the fact that the politicians have different numbers. All of them have their own numbers. They're publishing them. Everybody saying that we've won, we've won.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
They know the truth.
They
They know
the truth.
They know the fact. As you said, propaganda. See, the question was the propaganda part. It is propaganda. People pretty much know how this thing is. I mean, the numbers are posted there.
Perhaps this level of transparency that both of you are talking about would have worked well if situations were ideal. But looking at politics, there are high stakes involved. It's about interest. It's about somebody pushing their own agenda of a political candidate or a political party. Don't you think that this then creates a loophole for this level of transparency to be abused to some extent?
I think on the part of the IBC, as a constitutional institution, they have the mandate to keep focus on the administration of the entire process. There are two things going on here. There's the whole administration and management of an electoral process, and then there's the politics of it, where you have the different stakeholders within this process. You have the politicians. If you're looking at, like, for example, Bomas of Kenya, you have all the IBC officials, the staffs, the agents and all, and you have the section of the politicians. Now, you don't want to get all muddled up with the politics of what's going on and the actual administration. So the IBC has that sole responsibility of making sure that the management and the whole administration of actually tallying and verifying these results and then producing the results. Because Kenyans have gone to the polls, they have balloted, and that now has been left to the IBC to produce the results. We have given IBC that mandate through our constitution, and the sovereignty of the people now is being guarded by the results that they're going to produce. And so it's not to say that they've been rumor mongers, because we've seen the chairman himself coming out and say that our system was almost hacked. And so there have been attempts of hacking into the system, but they've been thwarted. So these are not rumors. This is actually occurrences that have happened. And they have been incidences where now that has been thwarted. And so to communicate that, because remember, the last IBC, I think the chairman was the last man standing. We saw the whole thing crumbling. Everybody quickly resigned and took off. Others gave themselves exile out of the country. And so, I mean, it completely, like, literally fell apart. And IBC was left with a commissioner or two until now it's been built up into now this new IBC that we're seeing, and therefore the institution owes it to the Kenyans to hold it together and to produce and to deliver the results that will not really make people feel that anxiety into mischief, because there's a lot of mischief that's being read when social media or media highlights some discrepancies and these fears are not allayed by the chairman, then that builds suspicion. And build-up of suspicion, if it's not managed properly, can then now cause negative effects or reactions, because we are also dealing with the crowd psychology and just how people are going to react to this. And give it to Kenyans, they've really been patient. They've really been patient. A lot of people are just very anxious. And as they're being told, go back to work, go back to your daily lives, we've seen the CS for Education actually move dates for children going back to school. The children were supposed to resume going back to school today, but that's now been moved forward to a further date on Thursday. Because after the results are actually announced, you don't know the reaction of how people are going to take it. If your child, for example, is moved 4 or 5 counties away from home, then there'll be transport issues in case the school the child goes to is a place where there will be probably violent reactions from people, and you would want your child back home. And so you find that the anxiety is holding people back from getting back to their daily lives, and people just want to get back into their daily lives.
Okay, Harun, before you came in, we were talking about your assessment in terms, we'd like to hear your assessment of the process so far, what IBC is doing up until now, 6 days after Kenyans went to the elections. What is your view? What have they done right? What have they done wrong?
Very well. First, my apologies for coming in late because of traffic issues. But perhaps before I talk about the process of the election tallying itself now, I may want to say one thing about the process of nomination of commissioners and appointment of staff and procurement, because those are very fundamental to what is happening today. We have political parties and politicians who have an interest in who becomes a member of staff in a particular strategic area within the commission and who becomes the commissioner. You may go back to the IPPG days when political parties were the ones nominating commissioners. And that explains what is happening today. That said, I think I am somewhat happy that rather than wait for the servers, which my senior colleague Paul Muita said that the people who were managing them were asleep in France, we have now the results uploaded onto the IEBC portal publicly for everyone to see. And that is, for me, an important factor. Like I've listened to my sister here when she's talked about the attempts to hack and what is kind of delaying the process of the tallying currently of the presidential election is the fact that the choice of procurement of technology may have been an issue, so that it is now possible people hacked and uploaded fake results. Even though the chairperson of the IEBC has said that he will declare the result on the basis of the original Form 34As as uploaded, but that's what they are verifying as against the original ones delivered by the returning officers from the constituencies. And that is the reason. I don't know whether this is propaganda or not, because we have been seeing various clips going around with videos showing people coming in or staffing of new Form 34As which did not come from the returning officers, or some of the returning officers getting arrested on account of misbehavior or misconduct in terms of those forms. So that the question then becomes, what do you trust? Remember that the 2017 election, the first one, was nullified on account of inconsistencies, irregularities, and illegalities, which included those forms we are talking about now, because they were tallied, and there was a forensic audit which was court-managed and by court-appointed forensic auditors who found that there were discrepancies which had been shown in those forms. So I think the one thing that we have done well is the transparency in terms of trying to do better than we did in previous elections. But the second thing is that perhaps the process prior to the election was not appropriately managed in order to ensure that politicians and interested parties, especially those with personal stakes, do not interfere with the process. Because I am aware that it's possible for them to have interfered with the procurement of equipment, materials. For instance, the question would be, we have the political formations participating with IEBC going to Greece to ensure that the printing of ballots was done properly. Then the ballots come, and we find that the Mombasa ballots are in Vihiga or Kakamega, and the Kakamega ones are nowhere to be seen, or wherever they are, and which is the reason the gubernatorial election for Mombasa and Kakamega were postponed. Why would that happen if all these people had gone to Greece to cross-check. But perhaps musingly, what I find funny is that money, which is probably the most valuable thing we have as Kenyans, is printed in Nairobi. Ballots of an election which comes once every 5 years, we have to go and look for some Greece or some Britain to print them for us. I wonder why.
It's because of the trust deficit. the impact of the missteps that Harun is raising, like, for example, Kakamega and Mombasa, the gubernatorial election is being done on the 23rd. Yeah. Doesn't that then deteriorate the trust levels? Because what Harun is raising is very important. I mean, the politicians were there, they went to verify. How is it still wrong? Yeah.
Well, I like what you said. Both agents or both parties had their people there. IBC did what we call a verification of those ballot proofing. Actually, that's what they call it. They did all of them. And I think the good thing, if you realize what happened, and the printer has been very clear, was the printer's own issues and errors, because even both sides actually went there. So we can't really put it upon IBC or those guys. I think that is square. If you really want to be that, it's the case. But like I said earlier, I think for me, the level of response, I think, was fast and swift and also transparent, because there's an issue. And given, of course, the first time in a country that has happened. I think it lays out to another issue, which he's picked up to answer your question even in a better way. I think it was the EU. I don't think you see the EU statement. There was the preliminary statement. They commended the whole process, and they highlighted a specific issue that affected timelines that we have, that IBC had rather, the issues of funding and financing. Because if financing is not done at the right appropriate time, then you'll have the problems that we have right now, because the time limits these guys had was so little. I mean, for you, these errors should have been caught way back, but because of the timelines that they were operating with, it was difficult. But also there's a legal aspect towards it, because you don't open ballot boxes just any day, anytime you want to. That's why they were discovered right before, because that's by law, you just don't decide, oh, I'm going to open up. Once they come, they are sealed. They come sealed. You understand? But that's something that should have been caught up if the timelines were proper for them. But they had crunch time to deliver this thing, given when funds were released for them to do that. And if we didn't have the timelines, tight timelines, then this could have been avoided. So reality. But I think for me also, there's something that you raised just to answer your question earlier. See, in terms of the transparency, let me just respond this way. And the back and forth between who was won and who's lost and back and forth. It is not IBC's responsibility once they have published, because they're a public entity, so they're by law, we have access. To me also, we need to be responsible citizens and responsible leaders and politicians. So the onus actually is on the politicians themselves, because why are you busy, pretending that you've won the day after? Yet, I mean, if you guys were tallying, a lot of people were tallying, do you know how audience it is? It is quite an extensive, tedious exercise. The next day, people are like, oh, we've won. Like, you haven't even started counting. So for me, it's not IBC not the problem. The problem is those guys who are busy, perambulating up on the internet saying, oh, they have won, and they really actually even started counting these things to begin with, because people just finished the other day, because it's tedious. So for me, I put it upon them, the leaders themselves, and party leaders, and other people who are busy, back and forth on this issue. That's, I think, for me. That's
May I add something to what he's saying, actually, that I find important about the funding? IEBC is a constitutional commission, and we know that it manages not only elections, but the registration of voters, which should be continuous, except within a particular period before the election. I think 6 months to the election. Yeah. Now, why don't we have a fund that is dedicated from the consolidated fund directly payable to IEBC for the purpose of registering voters and the continuous registration and the preparation for elections? Because if the judiciary has the judiciary fund established by the Constitution, even though it has not been implemented, I think...
Actually. Yes, last week.
Last week?
Yes, 9 billion.
Okay. Thank you for the information. Mm-hmm. If we had that for the IEBC as well, because it also does boundary delineation, and that is something that is supposed to be done with the statistics of the population and the nature of the demographics. That is something that you can't do close to an election without mistakes. And those are the mistakes that could possibly cause chaos. The second point related to what you said is about the media's portrayal of the election. I have seen this happens even in the US. We see they show us blue and red. In Kenya now, the media is giving us maps of yellow and blue. Now, when you have a visual depiction of a map like that, that suggests one side is larger than the other, and then the result falls differently, then you cause doubt as to the actual result because of the media's depiction of this, rather than perhaps showing this is, if you did the map of Kenya and said, here we have this governor from this end and this end, so that people can even count for themselves. But when you have a visual depiction of a map showing that blue is about 2/3 of the country and the yellow is about 1/3, but then the figures, again, that come from the media show the opposite, then people start doubting, sometimes mistakenly so, they start doubting the IEBC or they start doubting the media.
Yeah, but Harun, just to stay on that point, how would you rather the media approaches this? Because I want to believe even the projections and even what is out there, guided by the principles that guide how media operates, it's what the IEBC has declared on the ground. Even the numbers of the governors and the senators, a responsible media house would actually go by what the IEBC has declared on the ground. If that is the case, how would you rather then the media approaches this?
No, the point I was making was rather simpler than that. If you look at the map, the way maps have been done by the media houses, they would show that one part of the country is blue and the other one is yellow. But you will find that there are governors from different parties within those blues and yellows. So what I'm saying is, just show, if you are doing the map, point out that here is a yellow somewhere between the blue, or a blue between the yellow. Just that. The other thing I would have liked to point out is voter turnout. There is voter ambivalence. Electors ambivalence. I do not know why, but I don't know whether it is trust people are lacking on election, or trust people are lacking on government, or trust people are lacking on, or rather manipulation and voter suppression.
It's the voters who feel disenfranchised when some of them went to the polling station and they realized they had been moved and they were not consulted during the movement.
Yeah, that's also possible, because I remember I had a client one time in the last election of 2017 who had registered somewhere in Nairobi, and when he went to check, he was already moved to Maragua. And when we went to court, the court was unable to order the removement back to Nairobi. So, but there is that apathy, but there is more of, it is the apathy that I find pervasive rather than that movement, or possible the disenfranchisement by way of lack of registration of voters in a particular area. And that's what I was talking about, the prior preparation and preparedness before an election is important. Voter vigilance, voter education, voter political education as well is important, so that people know that you need to have registered and be checking where you are registered. Now, you see, IEBC came, I think, about a month before the election, is when they were telling us how to cross-check where we are registered. Politicians, when they were campaigning, were not encouraging citizens to register. And then, of course, there is the political, during the political campaigns where citizens are bribed to attend political rallies, either by T-shirts and capes or money. Now, then they give a false impression of popularity of a candidate. But when it comes to going to cast the ballot, you find that only a handful. In fact, when I was voting at St. George's down the road, I was surprised that I walked through. I wondered whether there was an election going on, because the crowds, the queues were so short, much shorter than they were in 2013 when we voted there again. So there is the question as to why were the queues much shorter this time around than the previous election, yet the people either have not been deregistered and we cannot have had that number of people dead.
Cynthia, let's just pick up from that point. I mean, what level of investment was put in preparing the electorate for this election? We've talked about lack of funding of the commission, but let's look at how much of that goes into preparing the voter for an election. And even in terms of voter education, talking to them about their responsibility, how they are supposed to conduct themselves. Even during this long season of waiting for the results to be announced, many people do not still understand why it's taking too long. I mean, in terms of preparing the voter, do you think we have been sensitive to that?
That is definitely a gap. That is definitely a gap that is manifesting itself right now, because even with voter education, I think IBC did as much as it could in terms of preparing their staff and preparing the people who are actually going to work. But to the general public, very little. Maybe that the advertisements they put up was the only voter education that we were getting. So voter education was basically left to the non-state actors, the civil society organizations, like Uraia Trust, I know, was really down in the counties doing the voter education, but at not reaching the general public to the proportions that they should. So I think civil society organizations have been left to do the civic education, and they depend on donor funding to do most of their activities. And so those activities are actually like managed by how much funding they have received and how much reach they have and the coverage of that voter education. So you would find like in urban cities and even in the towns, you'd find the people are aware of what they should do. I myself actually walked into the polling station and I did know that we have an election and we're going to do 6, but just the way they managed it. The first clerk gave me all 4 papers. I thought we were going to get 2 and then 2 and then 2. And then the next one just handed it over to me and they assumed I knew what I was going to do with them. So I held the papers and I was like, what? So they're like, go and mark there and then you'll be assisted to put, because I had to take time to ask. They should already be, as they give me the ballot papers, they should tell me, this is you have now received the presidential and the gubernatorial paper. This is what you will mark them and you'll be assisted to put. And the next one should tell you, you have now received the parliamentary. You have now received, at least to tell you that this is what you have received. Go ahead and go and mark them and you will be assisted in how you're going to drop them in the boxes. So that is also, I saw a gap in that for me because they assume this looks like a person who knows what they should do. And so go ahead and do it. But you should not assume. You should actually let the people know. So in terms of civic education, very poorly done. Outreach, very minimal. And so these are things that we need to really look at, the budgets, because the budgets come to Parliament, and Parliament is supposed to be looking at it. And when you're looking at how much money you want to give IBC, some of the people just feel a lot of it is going on to procurement of ballot papers and everything. And so there's that conversation. People are beginning to say, maybe we need to go digital so that we completely remove the use of paper and pens, where if the KIMS kids are able to identify us, then let's go ahead and vote through the KIMS kids. But again, there's a gap there, because I know even when I was in the polling center, like 2 people ahead of me could not be identified. And so that took some time for them to hold up their ID on their chin and to take the pictures and for them to be uploaded and to get the manual register, which we know was a debate before going into this election, the use of manual register. And it came in so handy And the people who had been opposing the use of the manual registers were actually beneficiaries of the same manual register. And so that education that if you cannot be found within the Cambs kids, they'll be able to use the manual register because everybody should be in the manual register. That information needs to go out there. Luckily enough, I didn't see or have heard that people were turned away. And so they've managed that process very well. And so there's something that he was talking about, I just needed to add in. He was talking about the timelines. Now, the timelines are really constitutional, and they really limit IBC and the production of results, and just the processes are within a given timeline, and they're set timelines. So maybe one of the things coming out of this election is if we would have to go back into the electoral laws and regulations to see if some of those timelines need to be adjusted. For example, if I know you're supposed to, we ballot on a certain day, then we're given 7 days until the results of the presidential are supposed to come out. Then we're given 14, is it 7 days within, 14. You can do a petition?
Yes. 14.
14 days. It's 7 days within a petition can be done, and then 14 days for the petition to be heard, and then after that. And so there are those timelines in the whole calendar. And so maybe just reviewing some of those things, if we find that there's too much constraint on some of those processes, I think that needs to be looked at.
Makori, there's several issues that have been raised by the advocate Harun Dubi here. The impact of the missteps by IBC, the missing of Kakamega and Mombasa gubernatorial race, but also the voter turnout. Let's start with the impact of the missteps by IBC. Can they then end up inadvertently influencing the election of that place? Because if this is happening on the 23rd, after declaration of the president, what are the chances that the candidate who's supporting the person who lost the presidential election will then be elected as governor in those counties?
Not even that. If you look at the history of by-elections, I've observed a whole lot of them. You're lucky if you get 30% turnout in a by-election. So I would treat Kakamega as though we're in a full, still officially election mode, as IBC said, for those two regions. As far as gubernatorial, and then I think 12, which was about 8 that were members of parliament. The turnout will be approximately what you will see in a by-election. If you get to 50%, that's a miracle, which allows me to dovetail to the second question, the turnout. In 2013, if I remember, the turnout was 86%. Then 2017 was 78%. Right now, we're about 65%. I know we're really focusing on voter turnout and apathy. But I'm going to give this analysis a different perspective, so people understand why there's a downward trajectory. Why I highlight that is because if you do a graph, it's going down. Trevor, if you go to mature democracies, especially in Europe, France had an election just the other day. You know what the turnout was? 35%. The more mature a democracy is, the less the voter turnout across the board. I mean, they are shocked we're at 65%. If you talk to, I've engaged a lot of, especially international observers that came here, much of you are complaining about voter turnout. They're like, this is pretty good. I mean, at 86%, to me, that was even unbelievable. You understand? The more mature a democracy, the less the turnout. I predict even the next election will be less. And it's not a bad thing to an extent. Yes, there's many issues we've had about civic education. We've had about that. But I just think sometimes people go, as we mature, number one, as a democracy. Number two is an economy. People are actually busy. People actually are working. Now, we are lucky that the CS called for public holiday, but in most jurisdictions, the election day is a normal working day. So you either vote early in the morning or you're on your way back home. So people don't really have time for this to do this. So I predict it's going to go that way. All I'm giving that is so that we can actually have perspective and have measures to deal with that. Because that's where we're going. We're going that. If you look at voter turnout actually in Africa, parts of Africa, we have the highest voter turnout pretty much across the globe. South America is second, parts of Asia, then America, North America, that is the US, and then Europe is dead last because they've been at it for 700 years. You know, and people are like, yeah, whatever. Not in a bad way, but that's just the attitude they have. I predict that way. And it's not anything wrong per se, but is that secondly, there's a flip side to it. And I'm going to amplify what the council said here. You see, not voting also is a statement, especially for those who are registered voters. They're saying something. And we ought not to be critical sometimes. They're saying also a statement. Number one, they have as much as I have a right to vote, they also have a right not to vote. Yeah, that's right. It's a right. It's a choice. We live in a free choice society. So they've made a choice. And what does that choice tell us? What are they telling us? That's number one. We need to ask ourselves that. Number two, we had 6.5 million new voters coming up from 2017. Out of the 6.5, approximately 2.5 million, I think, were registered. Okay. So what are the 4 million young people telling us? There's something they're telling us. So if you combine those who did not register to vote and those who actually were registered did not vote, what are they saying to us? They're saying something clearly. And if you're really objective, okay, rather than criticize them, they're saying something to us as a country in terms of governance. What are they saying in terms of where we are as a country? Yes, and they're saying something, and especially in the processes that we've come in terms of governance that we've had. So for me, if from a government perspective, they're saying something because why did they show up? They have very good reasons. Now, lastly, and this is hard, and I just want to put it this way. One of the things I think IBC can help us. There's approximately 150,000 law enforcement officers deployed across, okay? And majority of them could not vote. Why? Because you are registered in Voi and you're deployed somewhere in Kakamega because you're a police officer. There's nothing you can do about it. You understand? Now, 100,000 people is a lot of votes. Those people, Trevor, did not vote, not because they didn't want to, but because duty obliges them to be at their stations. I was actually one of them, but I had like 2 seconds. Literally, I had 2 seconds. I was so busy. I had 2 seconds to dash in and out because I had a badge. I didn't have to make a line. You understand? But I pity those who are deployed across the country. Now, this election is going to come. If you see the differences that will come, it will be pretty much maybe within that margin of 100,000 votes, which could have made a difference for people, you know, president. So for me, I would say maybe we can go other jurisdiction whereby people are allowed to vote early, especially law enforcement, if you're an agent working for the election, because it's your right, but you have to be also working.
Or we just call them essential services.
Yes.
Because there are a majority of people who are affected by that, not just the law enforcers. But Cynthia, do you agree with Danvers, though, on his interpretation of the voter turnout? I like how he has compared us to mature democracies, but I want to...
Are we that mature?
Yeah.
We are mature.
You know, there's a big chunk of
Yes.
people who believe that statement was a sense of hopelessness that will my vote count at the end of the day? Why should I queue? Why should I waste an entire day just queuing to vote? I mean, are we mature, or there is something deeper than just being a mature democracy? Cynthia?
Thank you. One of the things that we are seeing is if the IBC can manage the election and deal with the glaring gaps that were from the previous election. History has taught us replete examples of where we have seen outright flaws that have not been addressed, and therefore that would now dampen the spirits of people. But the argument that Commissioner is bringing, that mature democracies have 35% voter turnout as compared to young democracies like ourselves, I would want to bring in the aspect of the population and the types of population, the demographics of our populations, and the introduction of devolution. I've just finished my 5-year tenure as a member of the county assembly, and so basically I've been down at the grassroots in Busia County. Now, public participation there really affects how the people are now responding to government. The people in our rural settings really depend on government. They really depend on government. Even right now, just coming through the weather seasons, they're told when to plant. We have the chiefs and assistant chiefs who are doing their barazas, weekly barazas. We have the devolved government, county governments, who have their own administrations, up to the village administrators, who are also giving communication from government, so that the people are so dependent and they are able to see if monies were really appropriated for what they were supposed to do, if monies for roads were really used, if monies for water was really used, if monies were used in the health. They want to see that there's medicine in the dispensaries. And so the politicians have been going out themselves giving this voter education, and they have been able to see, like, most of, like, for example, in Busia County, only 4 members of the previous regime have been able to be re-elected. And the people have turned out in large numbers to vote out the previous one because they felt like they did not serve them. And so I think the voter turnout in rural areas is so attached to the governance, the devolved government, and how the people are feeling so attached to government, and they are seeing that they need to come out and vote for a leader who's going to take care of these resources, who are going to take care of these functions that have been devolved and make sure that we get these services. In mature democracies where systems are already in place, systems are working, there's accountability, there's transparency, then you'll find that the media is the one that's going out, and a lot of campaigns are being done on TVs. We've seen an increase of that even this past election. We've heard on radios and televisions, all the candidates are doing their paid adverts, and that's reaching the people. And we're getting more and more into that mature democracy kind of state. But still, the people are so attached onto this election, onto government, they are going to turn out and vote for the people that they want. In a mature democracy, to do this early voter I mean, at the post office, at Huduma Center, people will go and just put in whatever. You know, it's just like, it's all part of service delivery. But with us, there's the manipulation of the voter because of just how much handouts you're giving and how you're relating with the people. And so you can see that correlation between the voter and just how you...
A vote of no confidence.
Trevor, before you even ask that question, I'm amused at the expression of mature democracy. I don't know what a mature democracy is. Because, look. The fact that there are countries that have been holding elections longer than others doesn't make them mature. Look at the US and how they elected Trump. Look at France. Look at the EU. No. Let me explain myself. Even the EU and Britain, how Britain elected Boris and even elected to get out of the EU. It does not express maturity.
Why?
If you may allow me to speak.
Just finish. Okay.
Yes.
I agree with your choice.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all right. What I'm saying is, they regretted their choices as soon as they made those choices. That's the point I'm making, and therefore the question of maturity comes into question, and manipulation of the voter through Cambridge Analytica type of institutions. Coming back to Kenya anyway, that was banter. Coming back to Kenya, on the question of voter turnout and public participation, I had the privilege, unfortunately, it was not a complete privilege, of serving on the task force in the Kisii government's task force to inquire into the killing of elderly ladies on a suspicion or accusations of witchcraft. I went to a number of town hall meetings. Do you know, in each of those, people who attended expected to be paid or to be given food? So the question is, when you are participating in an activity that is supposed to benefit you, how do you then expect that you should be paid for it? Unless it is a private enterprise where you know you are a consultant who is going to be talking and getting paid for your work. So the question of funding to the IEBC in terms of public education, I know I've had my colleagues here discuss more about the funding for the processes, especially processing of the election. But the preparation for the election is not funded, and we have seen Parliament itself cut funds. And again, this is something contradictory, where you have politicians who have an interest in elections being the ones to approve budgets related to elections. They are the ones approving budgets related to the judiciary. But again, that is the nature of the democracy we are talking about. However, we need to have the public engage more closely with election preparedness from the first day, not campaigns, but election preparedness from the first day after an election, so that the things we learn from, mistakes we learn from today, we will be able to address them within the 5 years, excuse me, before we start preparing for the next election, because of the timelines that my colleagues are talking about. The timelines are related to the actual election, voting, tallying, announcement, and dispute resolution. But we need to find a way in which the rest is corrected. The last point I want to make at this point is related to the amendment to the Elections Act, which brought about the unseemly coalitions that now seem to be the ones contesting the election, which in a sense explains why for the first time we have a lot of independent candidates winning. Now, these coalitions were forced marriages by the law, because the law was amended very close to the election. Member parties to the different coalitions did not have time to do their own primaries so that they can do a democratic election within themselves. They were not even asked, members of these individual political parties were not asked to make a choice which coalition they wished to join. So you find political party leaders, those you call party leaders or party chairmen, are the ones who decide. We are going to Azimio, we are going to Kenya Kwanza. So you find that the individual candidates and the members of the individual political party were unable to make a proper decision. And that is why either many of them from the same coalition lost, or chose to be independents, and those who were lucky, who were liked by their electors, elected them.
Cynthia, is that true? Let's pursue that line of thought for a bit. The unseemly coalitions that the advocate is talking about.
Absolutely. I see where, let me just give an example straight up from Busia County, because I'm straight off the field. In Teso South, we had a young lady who was a candidate on the Chap Chap party that I think the party leader is the former governor of Machakos. Alfred Mutua, yeah. And so originally, when she was joining the party, she knew she was supporting the Raila Odinga presidency. And midstream, the party moved. So during the campaigns, she was really hard-pressed to say, I am Chap Chap of Azimio. There's a Chap Chap of Kenya Kwisha, but then there's a Chap Chap of Azimio, and I am Chap Chap of Azimio. And so that really puts the candidate in a place where the people feel you're speaking you're not... It's
both sides of the mouth.
Yeah, both sides of the mouth. It puts a question on your own credibility. Why didn't you move with your party leader? Because the party is governed by ideologies, and if you no longer subscribe to these ideologies, you should have moved with them. And so she feels like it was too late for me to move. And so many were caught between that rock and a hard place, whether to move with the party, maybe to stay as an independent, or... And so the place of coalitions, we find that, especially even in Western Kenya, where we had principles, political principles, Moses Wetangula and Mudavadi, who both are party leaders, being left out of this whole UDA thing. Because UDA went into the elections as UDA, UDA, and not as Kenya Kwisha. And so that... I'm straight off the field.
She's in campaign mode.
Forgive me, really.
Do better now.
Oh my gosh. Forgive me. Okay, yes. Their coalition. And so that affected some of the candidates as well, because the people, during the campaign, they know that they're in this particular coalition, but when you get to the ballot, you're only seeing a political party, a political party. And so the people actually vote for this political party, which gives these other political parties a loss. And so,
but there are many people saying the rise of independent candidates is really because the primaries were bungled with allegations
primaries
of possible...
were bungled, there was a rise in political parties, but at the county level, not many came through as independents, as we had hoped to see. We wanted to see probably a 10, 20, 30% increase of independents coming in. I actually don't know. I've seen the colors, but I don't know how many independents are actually in the national parliament. I mean, we were expecting to see a huge increase because independents were a substantial amount of the candidates in this election.
Your assessment,
but they did not come through. Yeah.
People still vote along party lines. And
people are still voting along party lines because the main two protagonists were these two coalitions, Azimio and Kenya.
There are people like my friend Okeya Mutata, who is now your senator-elect, who is in a party that is largely unknown.
Yeah.
So one would consider that to be, I would treat him as an independent because that party was not known by the voters. But
Okeya himself is a brand, and so he did not have that task of...
The one thing that I am very happy about is the formation of the National Assembly of Parliament. The fact that it seems to be half-half now is a very good thing for the country, because the tyranny of Jubilee Parliament, in terms of its a vast majority in the previous Parliament, was a disservice to the country. If you may recall, they passed a lot of laws, and many of which were nullified by the courts because they were bad laws. Because a decision was taken, they voted just because they had the tyranny of numbers in Parliament. But now, seeing that we have almost equality of arms in terms of numbers, I am pretty happy about this outcome, even if it is an outcome that is nearly illegitimate on account of what I've said about the amendments they made to the Political Parties Act.
Danvas, what do you attribute the rise of the independent candidates to, in your view?
Just, Trevor, if you don't mind, let me just pivot back to what you said, then I'll answer your question. As far as where I come from a coalition perspective, okay, we have, I know there are issues with the Coalition Act, and I know we have issues with that. But as far as coalition is concerned, you see what you just said, the last point right now. When I look at this, actually in today's paper, for example, if you look at today's paper, as far as coalition is concerned, I am actually happy. Because rather than have, we have 89 parties in this country. Can you imagine? And most of them are, 89 political parties in this country. Okay? Now, and most of them, 90% of them, actually 95% of them are just local, regional parties along ethnic lines to an extent. And they fragment our society and our country rather than unite them. The silver lining for coalitions is they unite our country. These coalitions cut across. Yes, and Kenya Kwanza has strongholds across, whether it's from this side to this side to this side. They have members across the country. Azimio, the same thing. So for me, it brings the country together. So the less parties that we have, the better. Now, independence, to answer your question, you see, when you have coalitions, of course, will force independence. If you look at countries where like Israel, for example, or Germany, for example, where they have, Germany, I think, has 7 major parties, the Green Social Democrats, FD, the Israel Labour, and Likud. See, coalitions, unlike where we have, to answer your question on independence, coalitions are based on ideology, okay? You understand? So if you're left-leaning, all the left parties are on one side. If you're right-leaning, all the right-leaning parties on one side, okay? And then you have the moderates who, will now, they're neither left nor right. Based on that ideology, that's usually the worst. Now, in our country, we don't have, coalitions are not ideology-based. They are special purpose vehicles. Actually, I predict most of these parties within these coalitions, within a year or two, they'll start fragmenting. Because they are there for this election, not because they genuinely believe on a specific platform. This is what we stand for as a coalition. If you really ask them what they stand for, they just wanted to win the election. That's about it. So, you understand? So once they win or lose, that's the end of this election. But for me, it's a good thing. Now, independence to me will play a critical role in terms of what he has said, because they can be the swing. Because if you look at the nation today, the blue and the yellow are almost thereabout. So if you really want to move a motion in Parliament, either in Senate, especially National Assembly, you need the independence. But also, we know where most of them lean to or lean on. So you can pretty much predict. But at least the checks and balances is very good for democracy and governance.
Yeah, because the switch from the independence is because the party's primaries didn't go according to their plan, so they're not entirely independent.
Yes,
so
they're not really independent. Yeah, they still belong to a certain section.
Even on the campaign trail, you could hear some of these independent candidates saying, for them to win, they would say, I'm an independent but affiliated to me, or affiliated, like I'm supporting so-and-so, but I'm an independent candidate. But an interesting point there you've raised, and it concerns me what we are looking at in terms of transition, because I'm yet to see a political marriage that lasts in this country, like to 5 or even 10-year term. Azimio, for instance, has brought together, is it over 20 political parties? Yeah. I mean, what are we looking at? Because Harun is optimistic about, Parliament being split almost into half, saying it's a good thing if in his own assessment. But how are we likely to benefit from that, coming from a history of political marriages that don't last? As soon as they get to Parliament, will this hold, Cynthia?
Actually, political parties themselves, as individual political party, as individual institutions, the one that has lasted longest is possibly KANU, and the next would be ODM.
So are we likely to benefit from this arrangement anyway?
This arrangement...
political interests, because politics is about interests, and it depends on what's in it for me. Because I know, coming into... sorry to cut you short, but just to input a little bit, we had the Coalition for Restoration and Democracy in 2013 that held together until it welcomed and incorporated another principle coming into the 2017, and they became the National Super Alliance, and they held together until they felt like they could no longer stick together, because it was all about interests. It's like going into this election, what's in it for me? And it's like basically sharing out the cake. If once we get into government, this is how we're going to govern, and we will govern in this way. And so everything is all laid out. And we've seen that even with the UDA party. The principals from various political parties, when they came in to support the UDA candidate, they were promised a certain number of cabinet positions, certain numbers of PSS, basically sharing out the government structure and saying that this is what's in it for you if you bring me the vote. And so for that to hold together, you need to win this election. And that's why it's right now all focus is on Bomas. Who's going to get this thing? Because we need to manage our various wives in this whole marriage, wives or husbands.
Actually, the question of interest, I think I would have qualified it to personal interest of the politicians, because so far as I see things, there are no political parties that are pursuing a national public interest. The only organ that does a public interest is possibly civil society, that does genuine public interest issues. But the political parties pursue the interests of their leaders and their ethnic groups, because under their leadership is based on support from their ethnic communities. So if we had politicians like we had at the time of fighting for independence, who wished well for the country, then we would be saying they are focused on a public interest. But now we have politicians who are thinking about themselves. So when you hear the political leadership of Kenya Kwanza, they are insisting they want to be president and lead the country. They are not saying we want to lead the country so that we make ABC for the country. The leadership of Azimio doesn't say this is what we want to do for the country, except the difference is that the Azimio leadership has previously shown that they have fought for public interest, and that is the only affection they may have with those who support public interest. Otherwise, our political parties are vehicles for individuals to get to leadership, and that's why when they join coalitions, they are pursuing that personal interest, as she's saying. And once the personal interest is either achieved or not achieved, the next thing is we're going to renegotiate. I wouldn't be surprised that even these independents who are being elected will be voting alongside the sides of the political coalitions they wish to support in terms of the leadership of that political coalition. Or even these political, whoever wins, will be buying the independents or buying MPs from the other side, because we have seen them being bought all along. And that is the issue that leads me to the question of corruption in Parliament. We have seen our Parliament being accused of being bought to vote one way or another, depending on what the leadership of either a particular bill or a particular interest want. Accusations have been made. I'm sure you remember people being, members of Parliament accusing each other of being corrupted with either 10,000 or 50,000 shillings in the bathrooms of Parliament, and or being met by certain leadership coalitions, not coalitions, leaderships of parties prior or the night before the voting on a particular bill. So, whereas I'm optimistic about the balance, I am also cautious and plentifully cautious about the levels of corruption in this country and how they might be bought one way or another in terms of voting within Parliament.
But they hold together for us. And if we take, for example, in 2002, when we had the National Rainbow Coalition, it held together until we were coming into the next election in 2007. And so it holds together because when they all come together, they're actually going in to implement a certain manifesto. And we saw in 2002 the introduction of the CDF and just how well it was working, until we start coming into the next election where the politicians' interests now say, like, I want to steer this ship. And you have various politicians within that coalition now wanting to be the head of the ship. And so that's what begins to make that fall apart.
Danvas, I want you to look at this in terms of comparing the heavy manifestos that these political coalitions gave Kenyans before the Kenyans went to the ballot, vis-a-vis their likelihood of holding together, like what Cynthia is saying. What are we likely to lose or gain if you compare?
You see, back to what I said, you see, a manifesto is like a house, okay? The challenge we have with all manifestos from both sides is the foundation which they stand on, okay? Which I say that is the ideology. What's your conviction? What's your worldview? Because that determines your manifesto. It should rather ideally determines. For example, let me give you examples to answer your question. You see, using an American example, excuse me, if I'm a conservative or Republican, they believe in small governance, less taxes. So you know, for example, that if a Republican comes, he's going to say, hey, less taxes, okay, small government. Okay, if Democrats are going to come, they're like, well, We need more social programs. So you already know where they're coming from. The challenge we have with the manifestos, they're not really rooted and grounded on a firm or a specific ideology. You understand? They are expedient, is what people really want to hear. And if you quite frankly look at and examine them in a nutshell, what are they saying? They're pretty much closely saying the same thing. There's not really much difference in terms of ideology. All promising all these things they will do. Well, the challenge you have with that, if you understand even the budget cycle, is the fact that whoever comes to power now is bound by the budget that's already passed by the previous government. So there's not much you can do in terms of your manifesto. Your 100 days promises ain't going to work simply because the budget is already set and it's actually rolling. You will do your budget next year, you know, in July.
Supplementary budget.
Yeah, and maybe supplementary budget. Yeah, you can do S1, S2, S3. But even that, you know, if you look at supplementary budget, there's still an extent rooted on the regional budget. You don't really deviate much from that. So there's not so much you can do. Even the first S1 will come maybe November earliest, given how the House is divided. It's going to be probably January before you do the S1 you call S1 in budgeting. So 100 days will be passed before you do anything to begin with, because you're bound by law. There's nothing you can do but abide by what has been approved by Parliament. Appropriated by Parliament.
But they knew this as they were making those promises.
100-day margin.
Well, they knew that. That's a trying to answer your question. Because there's governance. You see, politics is what they say, politics about pros. I mean, governance is a different animal altogether. The reality in governance, if you've been there, I am there, is radically different. So what I'm hearing both of them say, I'm like, guys, do you know the reality of governance? So people will be disappointed. Reality. Which now leads to what I'm saying earlier. Eventually, the challenging of holding those manifestos and promises would materialize, because now, especially now that the fact that this House is pretty much divided, when it comes to appropriation, whichever person becomes to be the president of a country, they have a divided House, okay? Chances of you pushing all your agendas in this House are pretty much slim, because the other guys will be like, no. It will be very, very slim unless you're very good in your PR skills and managing people. So for me, you look at the next cycle, it will be a challenge to pull your election, because the first year, you rarely do most things you promise because budget has been set. Now, the second year is when you start. Now, the House is divided. Now, if these coalitions hold the way they are, it will be hard for you to get everything. You may get half of what you promised. Now, come in the next election cycle, what will you say? Well, I promised this. Well, I didn't deliver because of X, Y, and Z, but you promised. So now, back to what he said, the reality is seen in the next election cycle, whereby because you didn't deliver, people with disenfranchised, as Trevor, as you said earlier, voters are not really happy. And the turnover, of course, we've seen is almost 80% previous House. I mean, it's the highest turnover actually we've seen. A lot of people have been swept out because of the same thing. So I would say this, and to the politicians, to Kenyans, let's be realistic to an extent, okay? Let's be realistic to an extent. Let's be very realistic to Kenyans. Let's promise actually what can be delivered. I like a politician who can say, I'll do 2 things, and that's about it, rather than 50 things, because the manifestos are like 50 things, which majority of them are going to, I'll do only 2 things, and that's it. If I don't do, I can go home.
Yeah, but Cynthia, you know, the thing is, you've been in the trenches as a politician. You know, the key is to sell hope. If you are that honest to the electorate, would they even listen to you?
Absolutely. One of the things that Council pointed out was that we are looking at the characters and the people who are selling hope and all the marketers within that coalition. I'll call them, of course, they're the politicians, but they're the marketers. They're basically marketing that manifesto. One of the things he pointed out is like, what is the character of these people? We looked at one coalition, the Azmir coalition, has characters who have always had the public at heart and have been basically human rights defenders, advocates, and who we know they do what they say and they mean what they do. When they were given responsibilities in previous regimes and governments, we saw their actions and inactions. And therefore, we know that when they say they're going to do that, they're standing on these ideologies from their parties, that they are social democrats, that they are going to be looking at all these social welfare things that they have put in their manifesto. A lot of the things in the manifesto is going directly to service these people. We have seen, for example, let me give this example. When His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga was the Minister for Roads, we saw what he was able to do. I mean, he didn't, of course, with public participation, but if he needed to pass the road through some suburb that had all these plush houses. We saw these houses coming down because the road had to be done. And this is the radical surgery that Kenya needs. And we know that the people who are speaking, they're not speaking from both sides of their mouth, that these people, once they have said this, they're going to do it. Whereas in another coalition, you're looking at the character of the person. Why aren't they talking, why aren't they crusading against what is really ailing Kenya? Because a lot of the things that people have said, especially when there was a previous process in the whole country airing their views, which was the Building Bridges initiatives. I hate to bring it up now, but okay, not hate, but I had to bring it up because that's where really Kenyans... And corruption was a major issue. And when you see one of the people, one side of the coalition not bringing this up, not speaking to it, not saying how they're going to handle it, then you'll be a little bit skeptical about how they're going to deliver. And therefore, that's where now the 100 days delivery will be a challenge for them, because what you say and what you do are two different things. Okay. And so you're able to see that.
We'll get into the Chapter 6 leadership and integrity part, but let's hear what Harun Ndubi has to say about these issues of promises being made by politicians and the expectations of the electorate in terms of the manifesto.
Actually, I keep wondering what, or even why they make the promises. Because the biggest promise Kenya has, and that is the basis of the hope of the country, is the Constitution. If you upheld the Constitution and enacted laws that followed the Constitution and did everything in accordance with the law, that will help us deliver. Because what we need in terms of the selling of that hope idea, what we need really is an environment where human dignity, equality, and the equality of opportunity is available to everyone. Once that is done, people will be able to invest in themselves and do and achieve their dreams. But when a politicians promise us that we are going to give you money, what is that? What they have not said anything much about infrastructure or in health. Okay, Azimio's leader said there will be something called Baba Care. He has not unpacked it. I have not understood what it means in terms of the reality of it. But saying, I will give you cash. The Kenya Kwanza leader has said, I'm going to give you this many billions. On what basis? And I like what he says. The budget is already done. So where are you going to get these billions from? You are going to tax people. And he's not saying this is how I will tax the richer and probably tax less the poorer, so that there is some level of equity in terms of taxation, so that those who are poor can make savings and improve their lives. Those who are too rich can sacrifice something so that the poorer will benefit. So the political promises are basically trash. If you asked me,
I wouldn't trust them.
Let him finish.
Forgive my language.
Let him finish.
I listen patiently when you're speaking, so perhaps learn to be that patient with me. The only promise that I would trust that can happen is a promise based on how people will respect the law, how we can stop extrajudicial killings, how we will improve the welfare of our security infrastructure and all that. But other things about giving people money and putting money into people's pockets, that is a lie. That's what I'm calling trash. Because there is no government that is going to bring money and give it to you for free.
Yeah. Harun, you've raised very fundamental issues there, but I'm just wondering, Danvas, to what extent is the electorate empowered to interrogate these manifestos to that extent and to ask those further questions beyond just what is being presented?
And the question, if they have read the manifestos, yes. I've never seen one myself.
Yeah.
Are the cash transfers to the elderly that are being implemented right now all trash? and how is it being paid back? You know, if it's being done at a minimum to the elderly, to a certain scale in the population, if it is now escalated to the vulnerable families, how would you trash that? If I came in and said there'll be no, I remember being in the county assemblies that the devolution ministry said no more benchmarking abroad. And those are savings. If then the leader comes in and says no more excesses of government in certain areas, it doesn't necessarily have to be in taxation, but just looking at how we can make savings in other operations within government so that this money that has been saved is actually put to finance this program that we have, I think it is doable.
So there's value in some...
Yes, it's being done at a minimal. It can be escalated.
Yeah. But who's asking the how, the pertinent questions about how sustainable and how practical this is? I believe that is what Harun is raising. Because yes, these promises come, they're big and they're enticing. And sometimes they can generate that much needed energy from the electorate. But who is asking how it's going to be implemented? Ali, we're just talking about the magic of 100 days, and Danvers is breaking down how it's impractical as we speak. Who is going deeper?
You see, first of all, to your first question about the people being empowered, quite frankly, for the most part, the Kenyan population, I now that the Premier League is on, I don't watch it myself, but the people who really love it, Kenyans and politicians like the Premier League, they are so emotionally vested in these politicians on both sides. I mean, they're emotionally vested. Now, if you had to ask one of the players in the Premier League whether they know any Kenyan by name apart from the president, they don't know, and probably they don't care. You understand? But Kenya is so vested emotionally. But how does a team winning or losing affect your life? Not really much, unless you did bet or put money into it. And that's a challenge we have with the Kenyan population in terms of politics. It's an emotional investment. Okay, it's not intellectual. Because if it's intellectual, then you'll ask the hard questions. The how? If you're really serious about it. It's emotional. I love this guy. Okay? Why? I just like him. That's what, so there's really no good reason. Or previously, because I belonged to a specific ethnic group, therefore because my leader is in that side, therefore I will support him. Whether that person is good for you or not is immaterial. You will just support him. That's a challenge we have. Now, for me, what you're doing here, because Kenyans are listening, is what we need. We are moving the needle and moving the conversation to ask, Kenyans need to ask the hard questions. Not civil society. That's not the work of civil society. Because civil society do not vote for politicians. It's the Kenyans who vote for. Because unfortunately, civil society has now come to the issue of accountability. Trevor and I have been to CMD. That's why we really, grill these guys. That's not the work of civil society. It should be the work of the voters. Rather than go to rallies, it should be the other way. Not that politicians speak. Rallies should be the other way around, where voters ask hard questions as to exactly what is asking, the how, nitty-gritty, because then it will be a sober-up expectation. I think to your last bit, here is the reality we face, and I feel for our country. There's a certain reality. There's an economic reality. If you look at the fiscal policy that is already in place, and the monetary policy that is already in place, they construe the next administration pretty much. The only thing they can adjust is the fiscal policy, because that's where governance comes. The monetary policy is set by the central bank. You know what really you can do. Our ceiling is facing headwinds. Inflation is high. Kenyans are facing reality of high inflation, for example. Now, it is not about to go anytime soon, okay? And that's the reality that now when it comes to governance, Kenyans need to face. And I generally feel for whoever comes to power, because they will really have a hard time stealing this ship we call Kenya, that we love very much. Because we are facing headwinds, we're facing challenges, and at the end of the day, whichever side that you can say that you're supporting, they will have that reality. We need to, as a country, still move forward on terms of these issues that we are discussing. In the next 5 years will be determinant of even how we move as a country forward, because for the first time we really have a balanced house. If you are, to me, I don't call it a divided house. I call it a balanced house. I'm more pragmatic in my approach. It's a balancing act. If you're in governance, one of the most important things you can have and soften is counter checks. Okay, Wakili just said right now, we just said implementation of law is so critical. If we operationalize an institution, our constitution rather, will be so far as a country. So for me, the checks and balances are so critical in governance, because when you have a runaway side of government, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's the parliament, whether it's the executive, then we have problems that we have. So for me, I look forward that the next 5 years will be to me, very critical for our country. Not, right now we're looking at the presidency and the election. For me, I look at the governance aspect of it, and now we go as a country. If they can steal the ship, it can bring sound fiscal policy to stabilize our country, then we have a chance now to move forward and to take off. Because this country has a potential, guys. I think we have the potential to be one of the greatest countries in Africa. And this is the time about we have to say it. The greatest resource we have in our country is not gold, is not oil, is the people of Kenya. We are the greatest resource. Compared to anywhere in Africa, we're the smartest people, I believe, and we can go further if we harness that potential that we have.
And what Danvas is raising, Harun, brings me to my next conversation. Appointments after polls, because he says we have the greatest potential here. But we've seen this several times whereby the political losers are the ones given plum positions as a political reward for having championed the agenda of the ruling coalition at that point. Should that be done away with, so that it is clear that if the electorate rejected you, then there's no way you should be given an appointment which is essentially going to serve the same electorate that rejected you to begin with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I will take it further a little, but let me say this about the politicians who have lost elections. Already, we have seen politicians promise others political jobs. Of course, we know that every political leadership has to have people it trusts in certain essential or in political support areas. But in terms of technical people, technicians, that should be left to the Public Service Commission to appoint the most competent persons. However, there is another element about those appointments that is quite disappointing in this country. If you look at the appointment of people to the judiciary, for instance, you will find that you are told, not just the judiciary, but other places, including commissions, where you are asked to get a certificate of good conduct from the police, get a certificate of clearance certificate from KRA, get a certificate from the HELB, and such others. Now, the question, and CRBs, if you have been listed, and ESCC as well, that is an exclusionary condition that is given perhaps to people who are competent but may be owing debts. And the debts are debts. They are payable, and you cannot be denied a job, or you shouldn't be denied a job because you have a debt. Two, if you have tried to do anything in this country, or anywhere else in the world, there is a possibility that you have made a mistake. If you do nothing, you will have a very clean bill of health, and then you get a job for which you are not competent. But I'm saying that regarding technical jobs. But for political appointments, I think every leader is entitled to have people they trust. If you have people you don't trust or you distrust and you expect them to work with you to achieve your vision, if you have any, and I don't know whether we have leaders who are politicians who have visions other than what she called interest, which I'm calling personal interest. I'm not sure whether they are there, but assuming they have a vision, or even based on those promises they make, even if they are false promises, or those that they can achieve, even if there are too many, but they can only achieve just a few, then you would expect that they should have people they may trust. However, the Constitution laid out clearly that cabinet secretaries should not be politicians or should not be members of parliament. But we have seen in the previous regime, the outgoing regime did at some point, I think in the second term, they appointed losing politicians into cabinet. And the question, therefore, was, are we descending, coming down, lowering the expectations or the high standards the Constitution set? And I would say the answer to that question is yes, because that's what even the promoters of the failed BBI were doing. Because they themselves said, we now want some members of cabinet to come from parliament so that they can account to the people. I don't know what logic they are using about that, about accountability to the people, because you account to the people by doing what is lawful in accordance with the law. There is nothing else you need to do to account. You account to the people also by giving reports to parliament and promoting public participation so that people can get to know. And like my colleague here is saying, let the people be the ones to asking you questions rather than you talking at them. But unfortunately, what we see in our politics is politicians seeking to talk at us. And they say, if we have appointed Haron Ndubi from your constituency, therefore your interests are taken care of. And that's why I feel fairly sad when you find people saying, oh, because our man from Kitui is going to be the prime minister, is good, or our son from Nyamira is the cabinet secretary for interior, so we are taken care of. And yet when Matiang'i or Charity Ngilu or whoever else earns their salary, they don't distribute it to you. In fact, talking about salaries now, that reminds me again about Parliament and its arrogation of the power to itself to improve their own salaries and change the law about their own salaries and benefits and emoluments, which is itself a reverse of the question of accountability and holding public interest. And if you ask any of those individuals, they will tell you, oh, you know, when you people die, you all come to us. I mean, the relatives come to us for fundraisings. When you are sick, we do. But when you are sick, it's your insurance which will take care of it. Those who don't have insurance in the village, it is us villagers, like our sister here, who will come to contribute. The MPs and others will not come. So that's why I think that we need to have politicians who are focusing on the greater public good rather than saying we are going to improve our salaries so that we can take care of our interests.
Yeah, Cynthia, should this culture then be broken? Because some of these appointments are even done before the election. We've seen, even during the campaigns, they would line up the CS and say, this is proposed for this ministry, this is proposed. Is it even fair?
We need to appreciate that the school of politicians that we are, the crop, not the school, the crop of politicians that we have, all went through the professor of politics, the late President Moi, where we saw regions that did not favor him. He actually brought up an individual who would represent that region. And basically, that's what we are seeing now. First and foremost, let me begin by commending the leaders who come from Central region or the Mount Kenya region who have been aligned to Azimio. Because the purpose of leadership, as Trevor alluded, is to sell hope and to give people direction. And basically, what the Central region or Mount Kenya region, their fears of not being Azimionated, Azimio aligned, was because of an argument that had been sold to them for the longest time, that the leadership on the other side is led by a madman, a man who believes in witchcraft, and all these are allegations that have been in the psyche of the people who have been raised with this psyche, who have this fear. And therefore, it was the leadership who now had the responsibility of going back and demystifying that, saying all this was campaign. How then would you call a person mad if this is a person who has taken it on himself to deny himself so that at whatever cost, he sees that changes are made. We made changes to the Constitution. We're able to bring in the Constitution. And the beneficiaries of that same Constitution that we passed in 2010 are the people now who begin to rule. And they rule and say, let's do this. 10 years you will rule, and the next 10 years we will rule. So the foundation of one side is 10 for me, 10 for you. And the foundation of the other side is let's bring the entire country together. So you find that one coalition does not have patronage in an area like in the Mount Kenya region. Like, for example, Azmio. Most of the people who ran on an Azmio ticket or Jubilee, for example, in Mount Kenya, have all lost their seats. What is Azmio supposed to do with Mount Kenya? Because now they believe in one Kenya. Do you leave out this whole region? Because we will only now work with the people who have been elected. The remedy is to appoint political appointments from these regions, people who were there, who fought for you, who stood by you, and they were selling this ideology. And what was the ideology? They are social democrats.
So is that for the people or for the selfish interest?
It is for the people, because these people are tried and tested. Because just like in a family, I can only bring this example to a family level. The more empowered or educated the family is, and the family members and everybody is employed in this family, the easier the family will live. I mean, if you have both husband and wife working, they're able to take care of the family needs. And in that example, so too in a community, it does transcend. And he's given the example, us local leaders are the ones who go for the Harambee. So too do the politicians. We saw when Jubilee, I just can't move from this example, Jubilee took on the reins of power, and one principal actually now made appointments for the entire country, and the deputy president actually made appointments from his region, basically from Rift Valley. These people, if I'm appointed a permanent secretary or a director in a parastatal, it's just not for me. Yes, it is for me, but I am called into these Harambes. I do have other employment opportunities that I'm going to bring in people from my country. And so it's coming from Kenya's history and learning from the professor of politics. This is the way things were done. Of course, the Constitution has cured this by giving us devolution, and that resources have been devolved down to the country. And we don't all have to go and line up at State House and grovel at the feet of the president to get a road or to get electricity or to get water. But the Constitution has answered this. But still, in the political sphere, that appointment actually affects that region, because you will be beneficiaries in ways that you probably do not know.
But Cynthia, if the people wanted that person to represent their interests, they would have
voted for that person.
Yeah, they would have elected that person. But Danvas, your thoughts on this also?
I thought the official campaign period is over. IBC will sanction us. This campaigning is still going on here.
We're in the season until they announce.
We are borrowing lessons, yeah?
So, but that's just it. But I think for me, see, there's a reality. I like being very real with the kind of issues. When you get there, you have to balance a lot of interest. I get your point, question, Trevor, and to answer Safin's, respond to Safin, let's be real here. You have to balance a lot of interest, okay, and expectations too. There are people who are on your side, who are your key allies, who've lost an election, okay, for one reason or the other. They have lost an election, either the primaries or the final election. These are people who also, because they supported you, brought a number of votes to you or are influential one way or another. Okay? So, as much as they lost, but they still were significant to your campaign, whichever house or movement it is. And the promises that actually are made also. There are people who, to balance the equation during the primaries, for example, people are told, okay, you step down, you give this, but you get something. Okay, those promises still have to be kept to an extent. So it's a reality of governance and politics, for that matter, that these positions will have to go to certain people. Now, whether they're lost or not, that's another question. For me, what I would advocate is whatever positions go to whoever they get is they're qualified people. So to me, I don't look whether they lost an election or not. The question is are they right, are they fit for the job? Because we have to think about the country fast. Okay, so patronage is there, but you know we have political appointments, our position political appointments, but you can appoint somebody who's right for that political appointment, who actually fits that role, the political appointment, who's qualified to do that job, who's competent to do that job, not just for the sake of reward, but for the sake of the country. So for me, what I can advocate for the government that is coming, think the country first. So even as you reward and as you fill those board positions and this and that and other positions and key positions in government, put the country first. Give people who have a track record. Give people who actually can deliver. And still balance your political side, because Trevor, it's a reality that they have to. They don't have much choice, because then if you don't, then you got problems later. So to me, interest, yes, political interest, but for the country, put people that actually can govern, can actually deliver results for the country. Now, if you do that, the governance or the administration that are in place have a high chance of winning back, because now you have key people who deliver, especially on the technical side, the technocrats, the bureaucrats. If you get the right people, let me tell you, we saw with Kibaki, I mean, you can transform our country, you can lay foundations for a country that will transform our country. Yeah. All right.
I hear what he's saying,
yeah,
but that is how corruption works. Because you get people to certain area appointments, call them cabinet secretaries, because you trust them and they're your friends and they're your supporters. When they engage in corruption within the ministries, you are unable to sanction them, because that's why we have seen not many ministers, except those who have fallen out of favor, have been charged in court. Those others who have continued to promote corruption but are in favor of the political establishment hardly get sanctioned at all.
Okay, we'll come back and talk about Chapter 6 of the Constitution, Leadership and Integrity. But for now, let's take a quick break here on Kenya's Choice 2022. We're keeping a pulse on what's happening at the Bomas of Kenya. We'll cross over there to Francis Gashuri to give you an update. IBC has until tomorrow. They're cutting it very close. There are indications that there might be an announcement today, but it's not been confirmed by them, because the latest they can do it anyway is tomorrow. It's tomorrow.
So far, the forms they've received online, Form 34B stand at 286 out of 291. In terms of Form 34As, they've received 46,201 out of 46,229.
Yes, we'll find out from Gashuri whether all the returning officers are there and how many they've tallied and confirmed.